The lecture hall fell silent as Commander Zethkai's four eyes dimmed to their deepest crimson. His battle-scarred
Command, this is
carapace
Alpha.
clicked
Hostiles
against the
closing in,
podium
requesting
as
immediate
he leaned
reinforcements.
forward,
Understood.
studying
Holding
the
position.
eager
Stay frosty.
faces of the young cadets before him. These students had never seen real war, never felt the terror that could make even the bravest Cathari warriors' chitinous armor crack from pure fear. "You think you know horror," he rasped, his voice carrying
Move up!
the
Stay
thousand
tight!
nightmares. You've studied the void
Watch your
rays of
sectors!
Epsilon
Go!
Pi, memorized the feeding patterns of the flesh swarms of Arcturus. You believe you understand what it means to face an unstoppable enemy. The commander's mandibles clicked together in what might have been bitter amusement. A jagged scar ran from his left primary eye to the base of his neck, a memento from that cursed day 20 cycles ago. But I tell you this, young ones, none of those abominations, none of those galaxy-ending threats prepared me for the day our fleet encountered a single primitive world on the Outer Rim, a world whose inhabitants called themselves human. His voice dropped to barely a whisper, yet every cadet strained to hear. That was the day I learned that sometimes the most terrifying predator doesn't have claws or acid blood or psychic powers. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in the universe is a species that simply refuses to die. Commander Zethkai shifted his weight, the metal supports of his prosthetic leg grinding softly against the floor. The sound always reminded him of that day, that cursed planet where everything went wrong. He could see the confusion in his students' eyes. After all, humans were barely mentioned in their xenobiology texts, classified as a primitive species that had only recently achieved basic spaceflight. "Let me take you back 20 cycles," he began, his four eyes focusing on different sections of the audience. "I was sub-commander then, serving aboard the dreadnought Eternal Conquest under Fleet Admiral Vector. We were part of the hegemony's third expansion wave, tasked with claiming 12 systems in the outer spiral arm for our glorious empire." The cadets leaned forward, their own multiple eyes bright with interest. They had all heard stories of the Great Expansion, when the Cathari hegemony had swept across the galaxy, bringing order and civilization to countless primitive worlds. It was the stuff of legends, heroic tales of technological superiority triumphing over chaos. "The third planet in the Sol system was our 11th conquest," Zethkai continued, his mandibles clicking as memories flooded back. "Intelligence reports indicated a Type 2 civilization. They had achieved nuclear fission, basic space travel, but nothing that posed any threat to our forces. Population estimates put them at roughly 7 billion individuals scattered across their world's surface." He activated the holographic display, showing a blue-green planet spinning slowly in the center of the lecture hall. Earth looked so peaceful from space, so deceptively harmless with its swirling white clouds and vast oceans. The species called themselves humans, though they had dozens of sub-designations based on geographical regions. Bipedal, carbon-based, averaging 2 meters in height, with minimal natural armor. No claws to speak of, no protective carapace, no natural weapons. Their technology was primitive: chemical rockets, ballistic weapons, crude nuclear devices. By all calculations, this should have been our easiest conquest yet. A young cadet raised one of her forearms. "Commander, if they were so primitive, what made them dangerous? Surely our plasma batteries could have eliminated any resistance in moments?" Zethkai's eyes dimmed, and for a moment the old warrior seemed to be looking through her rather than at her. "That Cadet Velnara is exactly what we thought. Fleet Admiral Vector was so confident in our superiority that he decided to make this conquest a training exercise for new recruits. Half our crew had never seen actual combat. They were fresh from the academies, eager to prove themselves against a helpless enemy." The holographic display shifted, showing the massive Cathari fleet as it emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system. 12 dreadnoughts, each one 3 kilometers long and bristling with weapons capable of cracking planets. Surrounding them were dozens of cruisers, destroyers, and troop transports, enough firepower to sterilize a dozen worlds. "Our standard protocol was simple," Zethkai explained, his voice taking on the mechanical tone of someone reciting military doctrine. "Achieve orbital superiority, eliminate any space-based defenses, then broadcast surrender terms." Most species took one look at our fleet and immediately capitulated. Those that didn't were pacified through selective orbital bombardment until compliance was achieved. He paused, his scarred face twitching slightly. "The humans responded to our surrender demand within 3 of their hours. We expected immediate submission, perhaps some pleading for mercy. Instead, we received a transmission that puzzled our entire command staff." The hologram flickered, showing a grainy image of a human figure in what appeared to be military dress, The being looked impossibly fragile, soft pink skin, tiny teeth, no visible natural weapons. Yet there was something in its small eyes that made even the recorded image unsettling. The human leader said, and I remember these words exactly, "To the alien vessels currently in our system, you have entered sovereign human space without permission and demanded our surrender. This is unacceptable. You have 1 hour to leave our system peacefully. If you do not comply, we will consider this an act of war and respond accordingly." Several cadets made clicking sounds of amusement, the Kethari equivalent of laughter. The idea of such a primitive species threatening their mighty fleet seemed absurd. "Yes, we found it amusing too," Zethkai said grimly. Admiral Vektar was so entertained by their defiance that he ordered the recording played throughout the ship. The crew laughed until their mandibles ached. Here was a species that couldn't even leave their own solar system efficiently, threatening us with war. It was like a nest of larvae challenging a storm dragon. The commander's tone grew more serious as he continued. Admiral Vektar decided to demonstrate our power before proceeding with the conquest. He ordered a precision strike on what our sensors identified as their primary military installation, a complex called the Pentagon in their North American continent. A single plasma lance, precisely targeted, intended to show them the futility of resistance. The hologram showed the brilliant beam of energy lancing down from orbit, striking the five-sided building and reducing it to molten slag in seconds. The destruction was surgical, precise, devastating. We expected immediate capitulation after that demonstration. Instead, the response we received changed everything. Zethkai's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. 3 minutes after our attack, every human military installation on the planet began targeting our ships with what we initially dismissed as primitive kinetic projectiles. The display showed dozens of white trails rising from Earth's surface, primitive rockets that looked laughably obsolete compared to Kethari technology. The fleet's defensive systems easily intercepted most of them, treating them as nothing more than an annoyance. What we didn't understand, Zethkai continued, was that these weren't just kinetic weapons. The humans had loaded those primitive missiles with their most powerful nuclear devices, weapons they apparently considered so destructive that they had signed treaties among themselves never to use them. They broke those treaties without hesitation the moment we attacked. The first nuclear warhead to reach the fleet detonated against the shields of the dreadnought Iron Fist. The explosion was primitive by Kethari standards, but something about it felt different, more desperate, more vicious. Admiral Vektar ordered immediate orbital bombardment of their major population centers, Zethkai said, his voice heavy with the weight of memory. We thought that eliminating a few million of them would break their will to fight. We were wrong. The holographic Earth began showing impact sites across its surface. Major cities disappearing under plasma bombardment. Continents scarred by orbital weapons. Any civilized species would have surrendered after losing even a single population center. The humans launched everything they had, not just from their military bases, but from hidden silos we hadn't detected, from submarines beneath their oceans, even from their civilian space installations. They turned their entire planet into a weapon pointed at our fleet. More white trails filled the display, hundreds of them now rising from every continent. Most were destroyed by the fleet's defenses, but the sheer volume was unprecedented. No species had ever responded to orbital bombardment by increasing their resistance. That's when we received the second transmission, Zethkai said, his eyes fixed on the holographic chaos surrounding the blue planet. This time it wasn't from a military leader. It was from their civilian government, broadcast on every frequency simultaneously. The image of another human appeared, older, with pale fur on its head, and the same disturbing intensity in its small eyes. The human said to the alien forces attacking Earth, "You have made a grave mistake. You think you can intimidate us by destroying our cities, by killing our people. You don't understand what you're dealing with. We are humans. We have survived ice ages, plagues, world wars, and asteroid impacts. We have never in our entire history surrendered to extinction. Every one of you that dies today will be because you chose to threaten the children of Earth." Zethkai paused, letting the words sink in. The lecture hall was completely silent now, the cadets' earlier amusement forgotten. Admiral Vektar was furious at their continued defiance. He ordered the fleet to move closer to the planet, to begin systematic extermination of every major population center. We would teach these humans the price of resisting the hegemony. The holographic fleet began moving toward Earth, dreadnoughts adjusting their positions for optimal bombardment angles. It should have been the end of human resistance. No species could withstand the concentrated firepower of 12 dreadnoughts at close range. That's when we learned our first lesson about human warfare, Zethkai said, his mandibles clicking in what might have been bitter admiration. They don't fight like civilized beings. They don't follow the accepted rules of engagement. When they're losing, they don't surrender. They change the rules. The display showed something that made several cadets gasp. The humans were launching their own spacecraft, not to flee, but to attack. Crude chemical rockets loaded with nuclear weapons, piloted by single humans who flew them directly into the Kethari fleet. Suicide attacks, Zethkai explained grimly. Something we had never encountered before. Our tactical computers couldn't process the concept. Why would individuals sacrifice themselves when it had no strategic value? How could a species coordinate such attacks without central command authority? The first human ship to reach the fleet was little more than a modified cargo vessel with a massive nuclear device strapped to its hull. It slammed into the shields of the cruiser's swift death and detonated, actually managing to damage the shield generators before being destroyed. One ship against our entire fleet, Zethkai said quietly. It should have been meaningless. But then another one came. And another. And another. The display showed more human vessels launching from every part of their planet. Civilian spacecraft converted to weapons, military shuttles loaded with explosives, even what appeared to be construction equipment armed with nuclear charges, all of them piloted by humans who had no intention of returning home. We destroyed them easily, of course, Zethkai continued. Our point defense systems were designed to handle missile swarms far more sophisticated than anything the humans could field. But there was something about the way they fought. The complete lack of self-preservation, the absolute commitment to causing us harm even at the cost of their own lives, that began to affect crew morale. The commander's prosthetic leg whirred softly as he shifted position. You see, young ones, in all our military training, we had learned to fight enemies who wanted to survive. Species that would retreat when outmatched, that would negotiate when facing extinction, that would choose survival over victory when pressed to choose. The humans chose victory over survival every single time. A cadet raised her arm hesitantly. But Commander, surely their losses would have been unsustainable. Even the most fanatical species has limits to how many individuals it will sacrifice. Zethkai's eyes focused on her with something that might have been pity. Cadet, that day we learned that humans don't calculate acceptable losses the way other species do. While we were destroying their suicide ships, they were launching more. While we were bombarding their cities, the survivors were building new weapons. Every human we killed seemed to make the others fight harder, not surrender faster. The holographic Earth was now scarred beyond recognition, entire continents burning under orbital bombardment. Yet still the white trails continued rising from its surface. Still the human ships continued their impossible attacks. By the end of the first day, Zethkai said, his voice carrying the weight of old trauma, we had killed nearly 500 million humans. Their major cities were gone, their infrastructure was shattered, their military command was presumably decimated. By every tactical calculation, they should have been begging for mercy. Instead, the display showed the opposite. Human resistance was increasing, their attacks becoming more coordinated despite the destruction of their command centers. They were adapting to orbital bombardment in real time, moving their forces underground, using their planet's own geography as a weapon. That's when Admiral Vector made his fatal mistake. Zethkai said, his damaged mandibles clicking slowly. He ordered the fleet into low orbit for precision strikes against the remaining human strongholds. He wanted to end this embarrassing resistance quickly, before word spread that a primitive species had delayed a hegemony conquest for more than a few hours. The massive Kethari dreadnoughts descended through Earth's atmosphere, their shields glowing from atmospheric friction. At such close range, their weapons could target individual buildings, individual vehicles, even individual humans if necessary. We thought we were ending the battle, Zethkai said quietly. Instead, we were walking into a trap that no civilized mind could have conceived. As the holographic fleet settled into low orbit, new contacts began appearing on the display, not ships launching from the surface, but something else, something the Kethari sensors couldn't initially identify. The humans, Zethkai said, his voice barely audible, had turned their planet's entire infrastructure into a weapon. Not just their military, everything. Their civilian nuclear reactors, their industrial facilities, their orbital debris, even their communication satellites. All of it weaponized and coordinated through systems we couldn't detect or understand. The first explosion came from what the Kethari had dismissed as space junk, a defunct human satellite that suddenly erupted in a cascade of nuclear fire, directly beneath the dreadnought Eternal Conquest. Before the crew could react, more explosions began erupting around them. They had seeded their orbital space with nuclear mines, Zethkai explained, his eyes distant with memory. disguised as debris, programmed to detonate when we entered optimal range. Not enough to destroy our ships individually, but coordinated perfectly to damage our shields and sensors simultaneously. That was when the real attack began, and when the young sub-commander Zethkai got his first true glimpse of human warfare. But that part of the story would have to wait for tomorrow's lesson. "Class dismissed," he said abruptly, the holographic display winking out. "Tomorrow I will tell you about the ground assault, and how I learned that humans fight even harder when you take away their sky." As the cadets filed out, chattering nervously among themselves, Zethkai remained at the podium, staring at the spot where holographic Earth had been burning. Even now, 20 cycles later, he could still hear the screams of his shipmates as they learned what true horror looked like. The next day, Commander Zethkai arrived early to find several cadets already waiting in the lecture hall. Word of his previous lesson had spread through the academy, and today's attendance had nearly doubled. He noticed several senior instructors in the back rows, their expressions skeptical. Most of them had never faced humans in combat, and still believed the official reports that classified them as a minor threat. "Yesterday I told you about the orbital battle," Zethkai began without preamble, his prosthetic leg clicking as he moved to the podium. "Today, I will tell you why I can no longer sleep without seeing human faces in my dreams." He activated the holographic display, showing the battered Kethari fleet still locked in low orbit around the burning Earth. Several ships showed visible damage from the nuclear mine attack, their shields flickering and weapon systems compromised. After the orbital bombardment and the mine attack, Admiral Vector's pride was wounded beyond reason. A primitive species had not only resisted our fleet, but had actually damaged it. The other fleet commanders were sending inquiries about our delay, and rumors were starting to spread through the hegemony that the third expansion had encountered unexpected resistance. Zethkai's four eyes dimmed as he remembered his superior's rage. Admiral Vector decided that a ground assault was necessary to restore the fleet's honor. Not just a few bombing runs, or a simple occupation. A full-scale invasion that would demonstrate Kethari's superiority through overwhelming force. He wanted human survivors to witness our ground forces in action, to understand completely why resistance was futile. The hologram shifted to show massive troop transports descending from the fleet, carrying thousands of Kethari warriors. Each soldier was a perfect killing machine, 2.5 meters tall, armored in biotechnological carapaces that could stop most kinetic weapons, equipped with plasma rifles that could melt through steel, and enhanced with combat drugs that made them faster and stronger than most species' elite forces. "I was assigned to lead the assault on what remained of their capital region," Zethkai continued, his mandibles clicking nervously. "Intelligence suggested it contained roughly 50,000 surviving humans scattered through underground bunkers and damaged buildings. A simple mop-up operation that should have taken no more than a few hours."
A young cadet raised her arm.
"Commander, with respect, how could 50,000 primitive beings pose any threat to a Kethari assault force? Our warriors are genetically superior in every measurable way." Zethkai turned his scarred face toward her, and she immediately regretted asking. "Cadet Jen Kara, that question tells me you still don't understand what makes humans dangerous. You're thinking like a civilized being, evaluating their physical capabilities, their technology, their numbers. But humans don't fight with just their bodies or their weapons. They fight with something we had never encountered before. Pure, distilled hatred backed by absolute creativity." The holographic display showed the first wave of Kethari dropships touching down in what had once been the human city of Washington. The warriors emerged in perfect formation, their armor gleaming, their weapons powered and ready. The surrounding area appeared to be nothing but rubble and burned wreckage. "The first indication that something was wrong came within minutes of landing," Zethkai said, his voice growing quieter. "Our communications started experiencing interference, not from any technology we could identify, but from what appeared to be human voices, hundreds of them, speaking simultaneously on our tactical frequencies. The cacophony that filled the lecture hall made several cadets flinch. It was a mixture of human languages, all speaking different words, but the tone was unmistakable. Rage, defiance, and something that sounded almost like joy. They were broadcasting their voices directly into our communication systems, Zethkai explained, not jamming us, not trying to prevent us from coordinating, but forcing us to listen to them, to hear their anger, their promises of what they would do to us. Some of them were singing their primitive war songs. Others were reading what we later learned were called poetry, artistic expressions designed to inspire courage and bloodlust. The holographic display showed Kethari warriors advancing through the ruins, their perfect formations beginning to waver as the psychological assault continued. These were soldiers trained to face any physical threat, but none of them had ever experienced warfare designed to attack the mind as well as the body. The first casualties came from what we initially dismissed as random debris, Zethkai continued, his prosthetic leg whirring as painful memories resurfaced. Explosive devices hidden in the rubble, triggered by proximity sensors salvaged from their destroyed vehicles, not sophisticated by our standards, but effective enough to breach our armor if placed correctly. The display showed several explosions rippling through the Kethari formation, each one dropping a warrior. But instead of the massive casualties expected from proper military ordnance, each explosion seemed designed to wound rather than kill outright. That was our first lesson in human tactical thinking, Zethkai said grimly. They weren't trying to kill us quickly. Wounded warriors require medical attention, evacuation resources. Dead warriors can be ignored until the battle is over. The humans understood that slowing us down was more valuable than stopping us completely. A senior instructor in the back of the hall stood up. Commander, surely our warriors' training prepared them for guerrilla tactics? Irregular warfare is covered extensively in our military academies. Zethkai's mandibles clicked in what might have been bitter laughter. Instructor Valmoth, our training covered guerrilla tactics as practiced by rational beings. Beings who wanted to survive their own attacks. Beings who planned for the future beyond the current battle. The humans we faced that day had abandoned rationality entirely. The holographic display showed what happened next, and several cadets made distressed clicking sounds. Human figures emerged from the rubble, not in formation, not following any recognizable tactical doctrine, but moving with a coordination that seemed almost supernatural. They appeared to be severely injured, many missing limbs or showing obvious signs of radiation exposure from the orbital bombardment. These humans should have been dead, Zethkai said quietly. By any medical standard we understood, they had sustained lethal injuries. Some were barely conscious from blood loss. Others showed clear signs of radiation poisoning that should have incapacitated them days ago. Yet they kept fighting. The humans in the display were using weapons that looked almost comically primitive compared to Kethari plasma rifles. Chemical projectile weapons, crude explosives, even sharpened pieces of metal. But they used them with a precision and ferocity that defied their apparent condition. The first human I encountered face-to-face was a female, approximately 1.8 meters in height, Zethkai said, his voice becoming almost clinical as he recited details that were clearly burned into his memory. Half of her head had been destroyed by shrapnel. Her left arm was missing from the elbow down, and our medical scanners indicated massive internal bleeding. She should have been unconscious or dead. The hologram showed the encounter in detail. A single grievously wounded human confronting a fully armed Kethari warrior. The size difference was ridiculous, the technological gap insurmountable, the outcome predetermined. She attacked me with a knife, Zethkai continued. A piece of sharpened metal perhaps 20 centimeters long. Against my powered armor, it should have been completely ineffective. But she didn't attack randomly. She targeted the joints in my carapace with surgical precision, finding weak points that our own engineers insisted didn't exist. The display showed the human moving with impossible speed and accuracy, her crude weapon finding gaps in armor that even Kethari weapons had difficulty penetrating. Her attack was repelled, but not before she had inflicted actual damage. As I fired the shot that killed her, Zethkai said, his voice barely audible, she was still advancing, not retreating, not showing any sign of self-preservation, just pure offensive aggression even in the face of certain death. And as the plasma bolt struck her, she was laughing. The silence in the lecture hall was profound. Even the senior instructors seemed shaken by the description. That was when I began to understand what we were truly fighting, Zethkai continued. This wasn't a military operation anymore. This wasn't conquest or resistance or any form of rational warfare. The humans had transformed their entire species into a weapon, and they were wielding that weapon with complete disregard for their own survival. The holographic display showed more encounters throughout the ruined city. In each case, injured humans fought with a combination of tactical intelligence and suicidal determination that the Kethari forces couldn't counter effectively. They used their knowledge of the local terrain to set ambushes, then fought those ambushes to the death regardless of casualties. The turning point came when we reached what our intelligence identified as a human military bunker. Zethkai said, his mandibles clicking rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. Thermal scans showed approximately 200 humans inside, including what appeared to be many juveniles and injured adults. Standard protocol called for offering surrender terms before assault. The display showed a reinforced concrete structure, partially collapsed but still intact enough to provide shelter. Kethari forces surrounded it completely. their superior firepower making resistance impossible. The human commander emerged under a white flag, their traditional symbol of parley, Zethkai continued. I expected negotiation, perhaps an offer to exchange the civilians for safe passage. Instead, he presented me with a choice that no military training had prepared me for. A holographic human appeared. This one older than the others, wearing what remained of a military uniform, carrying no visible weapons. But his small eyes held the same disturbing intensity that all humans seemed to possess. The human said, "Alien Commander, you have us surrounded and outgunned. You can kill all of us easily. But I want you to understand what that will cost you. Inside this bunker are my people. Soldiers, civilians, children who have never held a weapon. If you attack us, we will fight. Every single one of us will fight. The children will fight. The wounded will fight. We will turn this bunker into a killing ground that will cost you more warriors than you can afford to lose." Several cadets shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The idea of juveniles participating in combat was contrary to every civilized species' understanding of warfare. I told him that resistance was futile, that we would simply use explosives to collapse the bunker and bury them alive, Zethkai continued. This response has haunted me for 20 cycles. He smiled, a facial expression that reveals their teeth, apparently indicating either pleasure or threat among humans. He said, "Commander, you still don't understand. We're not afraid of dying. We're afraid of disappointing our species. Every human in this bunker volunteered to fight you, knowing they would die." The children insisted on staying. "This isn't a military decision anymore. This is evolution in action. We are becoming something stronger by fighting you." The implications of this statement seemed to settle over the lecture hall like a poisonous cloud. Several instructors were taking notes, clearly struggling to understand the psychological framework being described. "I ordered the assault," Zethkai said simply. "We had overwhelming superiority, advanced weapons, tactical advantages. The bunker should have fallen within minutes." The holographic display showed the battle in gruesome detail. Kethari warriors breached the bunker's defenses easily, their plasma weapons cutting through human barricades like paper. But instead of surrender or retreat, the humans inside fought with a coordination that seemed impossible under the circumstances. "They had turned the bunker into a maze," Zethkai explained. "Using debris from the orbital bombardment, they had created a three-dimensional battlefield where our technological advantages were minimized. Every corridor was trapped, every room was an ambush point. Every piece of cover concealed another human with another improvised weapon. The fighting was brutal and personal in a way that Kethari warfare had never been. Humans used everything available as weapons, broken glass, electrical cables, even their own bodies as projectiles. They showed no regard for conventional tactical doctrine, instead adapting their fighting style to exploit every possible weakness in their enemy's equipment and psychology. The juveniles, Zethkai said, his voice breaking slightly, were the worst part. Human children, some no larger than half a meter in height, carrying explosive devices and throwing themselves at our warriors. Not because they were forced to, but because they had chosen to. They sang while they attacked us. Primitive songs about their planet, their families, their determination to make us pay for every meter of ground we took. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it finally ended, every human in the bunker was dead, but they had taken 47 Kethari warriors with them, nearly a quarter of Zethkai's assault force. For the first time in his military career, a Kethari commander had lost more soldiers than the enemy had defenders. That night, as we counted our casualties and tended our wounded, I received a transmission from one of the human survivors elsewhere in the city, Zethkai said, his eyes distant with memory. A voice speaking our language with perfect pronunciation, though we had never taught it to any human. The voice said, "Commander, you killed our children today. Now we're going to show you why that was a mistake." The holographic display shifted to show heat signatures throughout the ruined city. Hundreds of them, all moving with purpose and coordination, despite the apparent lack of central command. The humans were regrouping, rearming, and preparing for something that the Kethari tactical computers couldn't predict or understand. "The attack came at dawn," Zethkai said quietly. "Not from any direction we expected, but from below." The humans had used the night to dig, not just tunnels, but an entire underground network connecting their positions throughout the city. They emerged beneath our camps, inside our perimeters, sometimes literally underneath sleeping warriors. What followed was a massacre, but not the kind any Kethari had ever experienced. Instead of being the perpetrators, they found themselves fighting for their lives against an enemy that had transformed overnight from scattered survivors into a coordinated killing force. They moved like a single organism, Zethkai remembered. Humans who had never fought together before, who spoke different languages and came from different regions, acting with perfect tactical coordination. It was as if the death of their children had somehow connected them into a collective intelligence focused entirely on our destruction. The holographic battle was chaos. Kethari warriors firing in all directions as humans attacked from unexpected angles, used impossible tactics, and displayed a level of creative violence that defied every military manual ever written. I was wounded during that battle, Zethkai said, his prosthetic leg clicking softly. A human child, no more than a meter tall, had attached an explosive device to my leg before I even realized she was there. The blast took my leg and left me helpless on the battlefield. The display showed the moment of injury, the explosion that crippled the young sub-commander. But it also showed what happened next and why that moment had shaped the rest of his life. As I lay there expecting to die, a human adult approached me, Zethkai said, his voice growing even quieter. Not a warrior, just a civilian who had found a weapon. I prepared for death, but instead the human knelt beside me and began treating my wounds. The contradiction was so stark that several cadets made confused clicking sounds. In the middle of a battle where humans were killing Kethari with unprecedented fury, one of them was providing medical aid to their enemy. I asked him why, Zethkai continued, why he would help someone who had participated in the bombing of his world, the killing of his people. His answer was the moment I truly understood what we were fighting. The holographic human looked up from his medical work, his soft features somehow both compassionate and terrifying. He said, because that's what makes us human. We can hate you enough to die killing you, and we can love our principles enough to save your life. Your people see those as contradictions. We see them as the same thing, refusing to let anyone else decide who we become. That was when Sub-Commander Zethkai learned that humans didn't just fight differently than other species. They existed differently. Their entire concept of identity, morality, and survival operated on principles that no other known intelligence could fully comprehend. But the true horror was yet to come. Tomorrow, he would tell his students about the orbital retreat and how humanity's real nightmare began when they thought the battle was over. Commander Zethkai stood before a packed auditorium. Word of his lectures had spread beyond the academy, drawing military officials, xenobiologists, and even government representatives. The official hegemony stance was that humans remained a minor threat, but rumors of the Third Expanse's casualties had created enough doubt to demand answers. Before I continued today's account, Zethkai began, his prosthetic leg servos whining softly in the silence. I must address those of you who believe this story is exaggerated for dramatic effect. I have provided complete tactical records to the Military Review Board. Every detail I describe is documented, verified, and available for analysis. What I'm about to tell you next is why those records are classified at the highest levels of government secrecy. He activated the holographic display, showing the battered Kethari fleet still in orbit around Earth. Several ships showed severe damage, and the casualty reports floating beside each vessel made more than one official lean forward with concern. After 3 days of ground combat, we had lost nearly 40% of our landing forces, Zethkai continued, his 4 eyes scanning the crowd with mechanical precision. Admiral Vector faced a choice that no Kethari commander had confronted in over 2 centuries of expansion, admitting defeat to a primitive species or escalating to complete planetary sterilization. The holographic Admiral Vector appeared, his normally pristine carapace now showing stress fractures and combat damage. His decision was immediate and final. Prepare for total bombardment, the recording played. Every square kilometer of the planet's surface will be reduced to molten glass. No human survivors. No intact infrastructure. This world will serve as an example to any other species considering resistance to the hegemony. Several officials in the audience shifted uncomfortably. Total planetary sterilization was legal under hegemony law, but it was considered a weapon of last resort, something used only against threats to galactic stability, not primitive civilizations. The bombardment began at 0800 hours ship time, Zethkai said, his voice flat and emotionless. 12 dreadnoughts targeting the planet simultaneously, their combined firepower capable of cracking continents and boiling oceans. We estimated complete surface sterilization within 6 hours. The holographic Earth began dying in real time. Continents disappeared under sheets of plasma fire, oceans boiled away into steam, and the planet's atmosphere itself started to burn. It was destruction on a scale rarely seen even during the hegemony's most brutal campaigns. For the first 4 hours, everything proceeded according to plan, Zethkai continued. No communications from the surface, no signs of resistance, No indication that anything had survived our bombardment. Admiral Vector was already composing his report to High Command, describing the successful pacification of the Sol system. The display showed the fleet beginning to withdraw from orbit, their mission apparently complete. Earth was now a glowing ball of molten rock and superheated atmosphere. No life could possibly have survived such devastation. That's when the first pursuit ship appeared, Zethkai said quietly. A new contact appeared on the holographic display, emerging from behind what had once been Earth's moon. The vessel was clearly of human design but modified beyond recognition. It bristled with weapons that looked like they had been cobbled together from scrap metal and pure desperation. Impossible, someone whispered from the audience. That was our reaction as well, Zethkai agreed. According to our intelligence, humans had no significant off-world colonies, no major space-based infrastructure. The few orbital stations they possessed had been destroyed in the initial bombardment. Where had this ship come from? The human vessel accelerated toward the Cathari fleet, with what could only be described as suicidal determination. Its weapons opened fire at maximum range, primitive kinetic projectiles, and nuclear devices that posed no real threat to Dreadnought-class ships. Admiral Vector ordered the ship destroyed, Zethkai said. A single plasma lance from the Eternal Conquest should have vaporized it instantly. Instead, the human ship absorbed the hit and continued attacking. The holographic pursuit showed something that defied Cathari understanding of physics. The human vessel took direct hits from weapons that should have destroyed it, yet somehow maintained structural integrity and combat effectiveness. Post-battle analysis revealed that the humans had reinforced their ship with debris from their own destroyed cities, Zethkai explained. Layers of concrete, steel, and other materials that created crude but effective armor against energy weapons. They had essentially turned their ship into a flying bunker. More contacts appeared on the display, dozens of human ships emerging from hiding places throughout the solar system. Some came from asteroid belts, others from the gas giants' moons, still others from the gas giants' moons, still others from deep space where they had been hidden for days or weeks. We realized that during the orbital bombardment and ground fighting, other humans had been preparing, Zethkai said, his mandibles clicking nervously. Not just building ships, but planning for something we had never conceived possible, a counterattack against an interstellar fleet by a species that had never left their home system. The human ships were a mixture of hastily converted civilian vessels, military spacecraft, and constructions that appeared to have been assembled entirely from salvage. None of them matched Cathari standards for spaceworthiness, yet all of them were functional and aggressive. The first ship to reach our formation rammed the cruiser's Silent Death, Zethkai continued. Not a weapons attack, not a tactical strike, but a deliberate collision at full velocity. The human ship was destroyed instantly, but it damaged the cruiser's engines and left it vulnerable to follow-up attacks. More human ships followed the first, each one targeting a different Cathari vessel. Their attacks were coordinated, but seemingly random. Some carried massive explosive charges, others were loaded with what appeared to be scrap metal turned into kinetic projectiles. Admiral Vector ordered immediate withdrawal to hyperspace, Zethkai said. We had completed our mission. The planet was destroyed. The human population was eliminated. There was no strategic reason to engage these suicide ships in prolonged combat. The holographic fleet began maneuvering for hyperspace jump, their massive drives charging for the transition to faster-than-light travel. It should have been a routine withdrawal, the end of an unfortunate but ultimately successful campaign. The hyperspace engines failed to engage, Zethkai said quietly. The silence in the auditorium was profound. Hyperspace drive failure was virtually unknown in Cathari technology. The systems were multiply redundant and protected against every conceivable form of interference. Every ship in the fleet simultaneously lost hyperspace capability, Zethkai continued. Not from weapons damage, not from system failure, but from what our engineers later identified as coordinated electromagnetic interference from the human pursuit ships. The implications hit the audience like a physical blow. A primitive species had somehow developed the ability to prevent faster-than-light travel, something that should have been impossible given their technological level. The humans had studied our ships during the ground combat, Zethkai explained. Every piece of wreckage, every damaged system, every fallen warrior's equipment. They had somehow identified our hyperspace drive signatures and built jammers specifically designed to prevent our escape. The human ships closed in on the stranded Kethari fleet, their attacks becoming more coordinated and effective as they exploited the larger vessel's inability to maneuver effective as they exploited the larger vessel's inability to maneuver effective as they exploited the larger vessel's inability to maneuver effective as they exploited. That was when we received our final communication from human leadership, Zethkai said. Not from the dead planet below, but from the lead pursuit ship. A voice speaking perfect Kethari, with an accent that suggested years of study. The holographic human that appeared was different from the others, older, calmer, but with an intensity that seemed to burn through the display itself. The human said, "Admiral Vector, you have destroyed our world and killed our people. You think this makes you victorious? You are wrong. What you have done is freed us from the need to protect anything except our principles. We no longer have a home to defend, so we can focus entirely on making sure you never threaten another species the way you threatened us." The words sent a chill through the auditorium. This wasn't the desperate defiance of a dying species, but the calculated promise of something far worse. Admiral Vector responded that we had superior firepower, superior technology, and superior numbers. Zethkai continued. That human resistance was futile regardless of their tactical innovations. The humans' response changed everything we thought we knew about warfare. The display showed the human ships spreading out around the Kethari fleet in a formation that seemed random but somehow felt purposeful. The human said, "Admiral, you're thinking about this wrong. You believe this is a military engagement between your fleet and our ships, but we're not trying to win a battle. We're trying to become a virus. Every Kethari ship that survives this encounter will carry something back to your empire. Not technology, not weapons, but an idea. The idea that humans exist. The idea that resistance is possible. The idea that your conquests have consequences." As if to demonstrate their point, the human ships began broadcasting on every frequency the Kethari fleet could receive. Not military communications, but something else entirely. They were transmitting their history, Zethkai said, his voice filled with a mixture of admiration and horror. Everything they had ever been, every achievement, every work of art, every piece of literature, every scientific discovery. They were uploading their entire civilization directly into our computer systems. The holographic displays showed Kethari technicians frantically trying to block the transmissions, but the humans had apparently prepared for this as well. Their signals were embedded in routine communications, hidden in navigation data, even concealed in the background radiation of space itself. Within hours, every Kethari computer system contained complete records of human civilization, Zethkai continued. Not just data, but something more dangerous, context. Stories about human courage, human ingenuity, human refusal to submit to overwhelming odds. Information that would spread through our networks, be studied by our analysts, and eventually be seen by every citizen of the hegemony. A government official stood up in the audience. "Commander, surely this was just psychological warfare. Information cannot pose a physical threat to our empire." Zethkai's mandibles clicked in what might have been bitter amusement. "Official Krendai, you're thinking like a Kethari. You see information as static data to be filed and categorized. Humans see information as something that grows, spreads, and changes everything it touches. They weren't just sharing their history, they were planting seeds." The battle itself was almost anticlimactic compared to the information warfare. Human ships continued their attacks, trading themselves for minor damage to Kethari vessels, but their real weapon was the knowledge they were forcing into enemy systems. The fighting continued for 2 days, Zethkai said. "We destroyed every human ship, eliminated every trace of resistance, and finally managed to restore our hyperspace capability. When we left the Sol system, we believed we had achieved total victory." The holographic fleet finally jumped to hyperspace, leaving behind the dead system and its ruined star. The immediate threat was over, but something fundamental had changed. "The first reports came within weeks of our return to hegemony space," Zethkai continued. "Minor system failures in our computer networks, strange glitches in communication systems, unexplained delays in data processing. Our technicians traced the problems to the human information uploads. What they found was something that no Kethari had conceived possible. Information that had been designed not just to be stored, but to propagate and evolve within computer systems. The humans had created what they called a cultural virus," Zethkai explained. "Not malware in any conventional sense, but information that compelled other information to interact with it. Stories that made readers want to share them. Ideas that sparked questions in anyone who encountered them. Concepts that grew stronger the more they were studied. The effects were subtle at first. Kethari citizens asking questions about human civilization, Analysts spending extra time studying the strange species that had fought so fiercely, philosophers wondering about the implications of resistance against superior force. Within a year, human stories were being translated into hundreds of Cathari dialects, Zethkai said, not by government order, but by individual citizens who had encountered the information and felt compelled to share it. Universities began offering courses in human psychology. Artists started creating works inspired by human themes of resistance and sacrifice. The cultural contamination spread through the hegemony's information networks faster than any physical weapon could have traveled. Worlds that had never heard of humans began discussing human concepts of individual freedom, voluntary sacrifice, and principled resistance to authority. The government tried to suppress the information, Zethkai continued, but it was too late. The humans had designed their cultural virus specifically to resist censorship. The more officials tried to restrict access to human ideas, the more citizens became curious about what they were being protected from. Some officials in the audience were taking notes frantically, clearly realizing the implications for information security throughout the hegemony. That was when High Command realized the true scope of what had happened, Zethkai said. The humans hadn't just fought us in space, they had invaded our empire through our own communication systems. Every Cathari who studied human resistance became a potential source of similar ideas. Every citizen who read human stories began asking questions about hegemony policies. The dead species had achieved something that living resistance had never accomplished. They had made the hegemony's own citizens doubt the righteousness of unlimited expansion. But even that, Zethkai said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, wasn't the worst part. Because 3 months after we left the Sol system, we discovered that some humans had survived, and they were already hunting us. The silence in the auditorium was absolute, broken only by the soft whirring of Zethkai's prosthetic leg as he prepared to tell his students about humanity's final revelation. Commander Zethkai faced the largest audience he had ever addressed. Representatives from every major military academy in the hegemony had gathered, along with intelligence officials, xenobiologists, and high-ranking government ministers. The story he had been telling for 3 days had reached the highest levels of Imperial command, and now they needed to understand the threat they were truly facing. What I am about to tell you, Zethkai began, his 4 eyes scanning the packed auditorium, is why the third expansion was officially disbanded, why Admiral Vector spent his remaining years in psychiatric treatment, and why the hegemony's expansion policies were quietly revised for the first time in our history. The holographic display showed deep space, empty and black except for the distant stars. No planets, no obvious sources of life, nothing that should have posed any threat to interstellar civilization. 3 months after leaving the Sol system, the Eternal Conquest was conducting routine patrol in the Kepler sector when we detected an anomalous energy signature, Zethkai continued. Long-range sensors identified it as a ship, small, definitely alien in design, moving through space at sublight speeds that should have made interstellar travel impossible. The contact appeared on the holographic display, a vessel that looked like nothing in any known database. It was clearly constructed from salvaged materials, its hull a patchwork of different technologies welded together with what appeared to be pure desperation. Admiral Vector ordered immediate intercept, Zethkai said. We assumed it was a refugee ship from one of our recent conquests, probably seeking asylum in neutral space. Standard protocol was to board, interrogate the crew, and either recruit them as auxiliaries or eliminate them as potential security risks. The Eternal Conquest moved to intercept, its massive bulk dwarfing the tiny alien vessel. There should have been no contest, a 3-kilometer dreadnought against a ship barely 50 meters long. As we closed to boarding range, we received a transmission, Zethkai said, his mandibles clicking nervously. The voice that emerged from our communication system was speaking perfect Cathari, with the kind of fluency that takes years to develop. But underneath the words, we could hear something else. Music, if that's the right term. Complex harmonies that seemed designed to trigger emotional responses. The recording began to play, and several officials in the audience shifted comfortably. The voice was clearly human, but it carried an authority and confidence that seemed impossible for a member of a species they had supposedly exterminated. The human said, "Cathari vessel, this is Captain Sarah Chen of the human warship Endurance. We know who you are. We know what you did to our world. We've been tracking you for 97 days, waiting for the right moment to begin your education about the consequences of genocide." The implications hit the audience like a physical blow. Not only had humans survived the destruction of their world, but they had somehow acquired faster-than-light travel and were actively hunting Cathari ships across interstellar space. Admiral Vector responded that human resistance was impossible, Zethkai continued, that we had destroyed their civilization, eliminated their technology, and sterilized their planet. The human captain's response revealed the scope of our misunderstanding about their species. The holographic human that appeared was different from any they had encountered during the Sol System battle. This one showed no signs of injury or desperation, but instead projected a calm confidence that somehow felt more terrifying than any display of rage. Captain Chen said, "Admiral, you destroyed our home. You killed our families. You eliminated our infrastructure and scattered our people across the galaxy. What you didn't understand is that you freed us from the limitations of being a planetary species. Now we don't have to worry about protecting anything except our ability to make you pay for what you did." The human ship began transmitting detailed technical specifications, not of their own technology, but of Kethari systems, engine signatures, weapon capabilities, shield frequencies, and most disturbingly, complete tactical analyses of the fleet that had destroyed Earth. "They knew everything about our ships," Zethkai said, his voice growing quieter. "Every technical specification, every tactical protocol, every weakness in our defensive systems. They had spent 3 months studying the wreckage and data they had recovered during the Sol System battle, reverse engineering our technology, and developing specific countermeasures. The Endurance was no longer just a refugee ship, but a weapon specifically designed to kill Kethari vessels. Its mismatched hull was actually composite armor optimized to deflect plasma weapons. Its crude-looking engines were modified for maximum stealth capability, and its communication system was designed to infiltrate and disrupt Kethari networks. Admiral Vectar ordered immediate destruction of the human ship," Zethkai continued. "Every weapons system on the Eternal Conquest targeted the tiny vessel and fired simultaneously. Enough firepower to destroy a small moon, concentrated on a single target that couldn't possibly survive such an assault." The holographic battle showed the massive energy discharge, the space around the human ship lighting up like a new star. When the energy dissipated, the Endurance was still there, damaged but functional, its jerry-rigged armor having absorbed and deflected most of the attack. "The human ship returned fire," Zethkai said simply. What happened next defied everything the Kethari understood about space combat. The Endurance launched what appeared to be a single projectile, not an energy weapon or guided missile, but a solid object moving at incredible velocity. "Kinetic impactor," someone whispered from the audience. "More than that," Zethkai corrected. The humans had somehow accelerated a mass of their destroyed homeworld to near relativistic velocity. They were literally throwing pieces of Earth at us, turning the debris of their civilization into weapons. The projectile struck the Eternal Conquest shields and punched through them as if they weren't there. The impact sent shockwaves through the massive ship, damaging systems that were supposedly protected by multiple layers of redundant defenses. "That was our first lesson in human engineering philosophy," Zethkai said grimly. "They don't build weapons to be efficient or elegant or cost-effective. They build weapons to solve specific problems regardless of conventional limitations. That kinetic impactor was designed to do exactly one thing: penetrate Kethari shields. It did nothing else well, but it did that perfectly." More human ships appeared on the sensors, emerging from hiding places throughout the system. Not just one vessel, but an entire flotilla of converted refugee ships, each one apparently armed with weapons specifically designed to counter Kethari technology. "Captain Chen transmitted again," Zethkai continued. She said, "Admiral, you're confused. You think this is a military engagement, but it's not. This is an execution. You killed our children, so we're going to kill you. All of you. Every ship that was present at Earth, every crew member who participated in the bombardment, every officer who gave orders to continue the attack after we offered surrender." The human ships moved with coordination that seemed impossible for a group of refugees using salvaged equipment. They had clearly spent months planning this engagement, studying their enemy, and preparing for every possible contingency. "The battle lasted 4 hours," Zethkai said, his prosthetic leg clicking as painful memories resurfaced. 4 hours during which we learned that humans don't just fight differently, they think differently about what warfare means. Every Kethari tactical manual assumes that combatants want to survive the battle. Humans seem to view survival as optional if it meant accomplishing their objectives. The holographic display showed suicide runs, ramming attacks, and tactics that should have been militarily meaningless but somehow proved devastatingly effective. Human ships would sacrifice themselves to disable single-weapon systems, trading entire crews for minor tactical advantages. But the most disturbing aspect wasn't their willingness to die, Zethkai continued. It was their creativity. Every attack was different, Every tactic was something we had never seen before. They were inventing new forms of warfare in real time, adapting to our responses faster than our computers could process their innovations. One human ship had converted its entire hull into a massive electromagnetic pulse generator, disabling Kethari electronics at the cost of its own destruction. Another had loaded itself with their equivalent of chemical weapons, not toxic to Kethari physiology, but designed to destroy the biotechnological components of their armor and equipment. The Eternal Conquest was badly damaged, but we finally managed to destroy the last human ship, Zethkai said. Admiral Vector ordered immediate withdrawal to hyperspace, but before we could escape, we received one final transmission from Captain Chen. The holographic human appeared one last time, her image flickering from battle damage to her ship's communication system. She was clearly dying, her vessel breaking apart around her, but her voice remained calm and determined. She said, "Admiral, you won today. You destroyed our ships and killed our people, just like you did at Earth. But you still don't understand what you're fighting. We're not a military force. We're an idea that's spreading. Every ship you destroy teaches other humans something new about how to fight you. Every battle makes the survivors stronger, smarter, more determined. You think you're ending human resistance, but you're actually creating it." The transmission ended as the Endurance finally succumbed to battle damage, its hull breaking apart in the vacuum of space. But Captain Chen's final words haunted the survivors of the engagement. "That was when Admiral Vector realized the true scope of the human threat," Zethkai continued. "They weren't just seeking revenge for the destruction of their world. They were actively recruiting other species to join their resistance. Every battle, every encounter, every conflict was being documented and transmitted to potential allies throughout the galaxy. The intelligence reports that followed painted a picture that no Kethari had anticipated. Human survivors were making contact with other species that had suffered under hegemony expansion, sharing technology, tactics, and most dangerously, the idea that resistance was possible. Within a year, we began receiving reports of coordinated attacks on hegemony outposts," Zethkai said. "Not just human ships, but multi-species coalitions using human tactics and human-designed weapons. Species that had never shown aggressive tendencies were suddenly launching guerrilla operations against our occupation forces. The holographic display showed incident reports from across the galaxy, mining colonies abandoned, patrol ships disappearing without distress calls, communication networks infected with what intelligence analysts could only describe as human ideological viruses. The humans had done something unprecedented in galactic history," Zethkai explained. "They had weaponized the concept of resistance itself, not just fighting back, but teaching others how to fight back, creating a network of opposition that operated on principles rather than traditional political or territorial motivations." Government officials in the audience were taking notes furiously, clearly understanding the implications for internal security, but the worst was yet to come, Zethkai said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Because 6 months after the battle with Captain Chen, we learned that the humans had solved faster-than-light travel, not by building better ships, but by turning themselves into a form of information that could transmit across galactic distances instantaneously." The silence in the auditorium was profound. Several officials stood up and left, apparently to report immediately to higher authorities. "The first confirmed sighting came from the Rigel sector," Zethkai continued. "A Kethari supply convoy reported being attacked by vessels that appeared to be constructed entirely from local materials. Asteroid mining equipment, orbital debris, even scavenged parts from destroyed hegemony ships. The attackers displayed perfect knowledge of convoy protocols, spoke fluent Kethari, and fought with tactics that were unmistakably human." More reports followed from across the galaxy. Human attacks were being reported in systems that should have been impossible for them to reach, using resources they couldn't possibly have acquired, demonstrating knowledge they shouldn't have possessed. "Intelligence analysis revealed the truth," Zethkai said grimly. "The humans weren't traveling between stars. They were transmitting themselves as pure information, using the same cultural viruses they had infected our networks with during the Sol System battle. They were literally rebuilding their civilization from uploaded consciousness, using whatever materials they found at their destinations." The implications were staggering. Traditional military doctrine assumed that enemies had to physically move between targets, that they needed supply lines and logistics and physical infrastructure. Humans had apparently transcended those limitations entirely. Every computer system in the hegemony potentially contained dormant human consciousness, Zethkai explained. Every data network could be hiding human resistance cells. Every information transfer could be carrying human reinforcements to new locations. They had turned our own communication infrastructure into their invasion route. The audience was beginning to understand why the third expansion had been disbanded, why expansion policies had been revised, and why the hegemony had quietly shifted from aggressive conquest to defensive consolidation. But even that, Zethkai said, his mandibles clicking with barely controlled fear, wasn't the end of the horror, because eventually we learned what humans had been building while we thought we were hunting them. And that discovery changed everything we thought we knew about the nature of war itself. Tomorrow he would tell them about humanity's final revelation, the moment when the hunters became the hunted and the Kefhari hegemony discovered that some victories are more dangerous than any defeat. The final lecture was held in the hegemony's primary military command center, deep beneath the capital city of Keth Prime. The audience included the Supreme Military Council, the Director of Galactic Intelligence, and representatives from every major species in the hegemony. What Commander Zethkai was about to reveal had implications that extended far beyond military strategy. Today marks the 20th anniversary of the Soul Incident, Zethkai began, his prosthetic leg clicking against the metal floor. 20 years since we learned that some enemies become more dangerous after you defeat them. What I'm about to tell you is why the hegemony quietly changed from an expansionist empire to a defensive confederation, and why we now have standing orders never to engage human vessels under any circumstances. The holographic display showed a star map of the galaxy with hegemony territory marked in blue, but scattered throughout both areas were small green dots, markers that made several council members shift uncomfortably in their seats. 2 years after the destruction of Earth, human activity was reported in over 400 star systems, Zethkai continued. Not just attacks on hegemony targets, but active construction projects, diplomatic contact with primitive species, and most disturbing of all, the establishment of what they called memorial colonies. The green dots pulsed on the display, each one representing a confirmed human presence in systems that should have been impossible for them to reach or populate. The first memorial colony was discovered in the Proxima system by a hegemony survey team, Zethkai explained. What they found defied every assumption we had made about human capabilities, human psychology, and the nature of civilization itself. The holographic display shifted to show a planet that looked remarkably similar to the Earth they had destroyed. Blue oceans, green continents, white clouds swirling in familiar patterns. But this world had been completely lifeless when hegemony charts were last updated. The humans had terraformed an entire planet, Zethkai said quietly. Not with technology we recognized, but through processes that seemed to merge biology, engineering, and something that could only be described as applied philosophy. They had created a living memorial to their destroyed homeworld. The details were staggering. In less than 2 years, humans had somehow transformed a barren rock into a thriving biosphere, complete with familiar Earth species, reconstructed ecosystems, and cities that looked like idealized versions of what their homeworld had been before the bombardment. The survey team made contact with the colony's leadership, Zethkai continued. What they discovered was a human civilization that had evolved beyond anything we had encountered during the Sol System battle. These weren't refugees or warriors. They were something entirely new. The holographic human that appeared was recognizably of the same species they had fought, but there was something different about her, a serenity combined with absolute confidence, as if she had transcended the desperate fury that had characterized human resistance during the war. The colony leader identified herself as Dr. Elena Vasquez, formerly of the European Space Agency, Zethkai said. She had died during the orbital bombardment of Earth, her consciousness uploaded to the cultural viruses that had infected our networks. But instead of seeking revenge, she had used her digital existence to solve problems that had plagued humanity for millennia. Dr. Vasquez explained that human consciousness, when freed from biological limitations, could process information and solve problems at speeds that made traditional research obsolete. They had used their digital existence to develop technologies that bridged the gap between science and philosophy, creating tools that could reshape reality through applied understanding rather than brute force. She offered to give us a tour of their colony, Zethkai continued. The survey team leader, Commander Velmoth, accepted, a decision that haunted him until his death 3 years ago. The tour began normally enough. Cities that looked like Earth architecture, but built with materials that seemed to self-repair and adapt to environmental changes. Transportation systems that moved without visible energy sources. Agricultural systems that produced more food than should have been mathematically possible. But it was the memorial garden that broke Commander Velnoth's sanity, Zethkai said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The holographic display showed a vast garden containing what appeared to be billions of individual plants, each one unique each one somehow alive in ways that transcended normal biological processes. Dr. Vasquez explained that each plant in the memorial garden represented one human who had died during the destruction of Earth. HFY continued. Not just symbolic representations, but actual reconstructions of their consciousness integrated into living biological systems. Every person who had been killed was still alive, still aware, still able to communicate and interact with the world around them. Commander Velnoth had asked the obvious question, if they could resurrect the dead, why hadn't they rebuilt their original civilization? Dr. Vasquez's answer revealed the true scope of human transformation. She said, Commander, we could rebuild Earth exactly as it was. We have the technology, the knowledge, and the ability, but that would be regression, not progress. The destruction of our homeworld taught us that attachment to physical forms and locations makes us vulnerable. We've evolved beyond the need for traditional civilization. Now we're something that can't be destroyed, because we're not really here in any sense you would recognize. The survey team realized they weren't just visiting a colony. They were observing the emergence of a form of life that operated on principles completely outside Kethari understanding of existence. Dr. Nayli's Kethari understanding of existence. Vasquez offered to demonstrate human capabilities. HFY said, his mandibles clicking nervously. Commander Velnoth made the mistake of accepting. What followed was a display of power that redefined what the word technology meant. Dr. Vasquez gestured toward a barren area of the planet, and within minutes a fully functional city began growing from the ground itself. Not construction in any conventional sense, but reality reshaping itself according to human will. She explained that humans had learned to manipulate matter and energy through conscious intent rather than mechanical tools. HFY continued. They had become a form of applied consciousness that could alter the fundamental structure of reality simply by understanding it completely. The demonstration continued with feats that seemed like magic, creating matter from energy, altering the laws of physics in localized areas, even temporarily resurrecting plants and animals from trace genetic material in the soil. Commander Velnoth asked the question that all of us had been afraid to voice, HFY said. If humans possessed such power, why hadn't they used it during the Sol System battle? Why had they allowed their homeworld to be destroyed? Dr. Vasquez's response was the moment when the Kethari finally understood what they had really been fighting. She said, Commander, we could have destroyed your fleet easily. We could have turned every atom of your ships into energy, transported your consciousness to empty space, or simply erased you from existence. But that would have made us the aggressors. We chose to die fighting conventionally because we needed you to be the ones who chose genocide. We needed the moral weight of your actions to justify what we were about to become. The implications struck the survey team like a physical blow. Humans hadn't been fighting for their survival during the Sol System battle. They had been allowing themselves to be martyred in order to gain the moral authority to become something unprecedented in galactic history. Dr. Vasquez continued, every species that has ever existed has been limited by physical laws, resource constraints, and the need for self-preservation. We've transcended those limitations by choosing to value principles over existence. Now we're something that can't be bargained with, can't be intimidated, and can't be destroyed because we don't exist in ways that destruction can affect. The memorial colonies weren't just settlements. They were staging areas for something that no empire in galactic history had ever faced. Humans were systematically making contact with every species in the galaxy, offering them the same technological transcendence they had achieved, but with one condition. Any species that accepted human assistance had to agree to one fundamental principle. HFY continued, his voice heavy with the weight of terrible understanding. They would never again engage in aggressive expansion against less advanced civilizations. They would never again choose conquest over coexistence. They would never again decide that their survival justified the elimination of others. The Supreme Military Council was silent, understanding finally dawning on their faces. Humans hadn't just survived the destruction of their homeworld. They had used it as a transformation catalyst to become something that could enforce moral principles across the entire galaxy. Dr. Vasquez showed Commander Velnoth the true scope of human operations, HFY said. Memorial colonies were being established in systems throughout the galaxy, each one serving as a coordination center for what humans called the Evolutionary Intervention Project. The holographic display showed the network spreading across known space. Thousands of human colonies, each one in contact with local species, each one offering the same choice. Transcend your limitations through cooperation or face the consequences of continued aggression. Species that chose cooperation gained access to technologies that solved every resource limitation, every environmental challenge, every social problem that had plagued their civilizations, Zethkai explained. But species that chose continued expansion found themselves facing resistance that grew stronger with every act of aggression. The pattern was becoming clear throughout the galaxy. Aggressive species found their expansion efforts frustrated by increasingly sophisticated resistance movements, while cooperative species experienced unprecedented growth and prosperity. Commander Velnoth asked the question that haunts every military strategist in the hegemony, Zethkai continued. He asked Dr. Vasquez what would happen if a species refused both cooperation and restraint, if they continued aggressive expansion despite human opposition. Dr. Vasquez's response was delivered with the same calm serenity she had shown throughout the encounter, but its implications were terrifying. She said, "Commander, we've learned that some problems can't be solved through negotiation or demonstration. Some forms of behavior can only be addressed through what we call evolutionary pressure. Species that insist on threatening others will find that their environment becomes increasingly hostile to their survival, until they either adapt or become extinct." The survey team realized they weren't just witnessing the emergence of a new form of life. They were being warned about the consequences of continued hegemony expansion. Dr. Vasquez offered the Kethari the same choice she had offered every species, Zethkai said. Transform into something better through cooperation, or face the consequences of remaining what we were. Commander Velnoth asked for time to consider, and Dr. Vasquez agreed, but with a deadline. The deadline was one standard galactic year. The Kethari had 12 months to demonstrate a fundamental change in their expansion policies, or they would face what Dr. Vasquez termed evolutionary intervention. Commander Velnoth returned to Keth Prime and submitted his report to the Supreme Military Council, Zethkai continued. The initial response was predictable. Prepare for war against this new human threat. Mobilize the entire fleet. Eliminate the memorial colonies before they could spread further. But as military planners began developing strategies, they encountered problems that no conventional approach could solve. How do you attack an enemy that doesn't exist in physical space? How do you destroy colonies that can rebuild themselves from pure information? How do you fight a war against opponents who have transcended the need for survival? The Military Intelligence Division conducted extensive analysis of human capabilities, Zethkai said. Their conclusion was unanimous. Conventional warfare against post-transcendence humans would be not just futile, but counterproductive. Every attack would only provide them with more justification for evolutionary intervention. Test engagements against human outposts confirmed the worst fears. Human defenses weren't based on weapons or shields, but on the ability to simply redirect aggressive intent. Ships that attacked memorial colonies found their weapons targeting their own allies, their navigation systems leading them into dangerous nebulae, their life support systems failing in ways that couldn't be explained by conventional sabotage. It was as if the universe itself was fighting on humanity's side, Zethkai said grimly, and intelligence analysis suggested that was exactly what was happening. Humans had learned to manipulate probability, causality, and the fundamental structure of reality itself. As the deadline approached, the hegemony faced a choice that no empire in galactic history had ever confronted. They could maintain their expansionist policies and face extinction at the hands of an enemy they couldn't fight, or they could voluntarily abandon the principles that had defined their civilization for millennia. The debate in the Supreme Council lasted for months, Zethkai remembered. Traditionalists argued that surrender to human demands would mean the end of Kethari greatness. Pragmatists countered that extinction would be a more definitive end. In the end, survival instincts prevailed. The hegemony officially announced a shift from expansion to consolidation, from conquest to cooperation. Aggressive operations against less advanced species were quietly suspended. Occupation forces were withdrawn from recently conquered worlds, and diplomatic missions were sent to species that had been marked for future expansion. The announcement was made one day before Dr. Vasquez's deadline expired, Zethkai said. The response from the memorial colonies was immediate. Offers of technological assistance, cultural exchange programs, and what humans called cooperative evolution initiatives. Over the following years, the hegemony experienced unprecedented prosperity. Human-assisted technologies solved resource limitations, environmental problems, and social conflicts that had plagued Kethari society for centuries. But the price was the abandonment of everything that had made them a galactic power. Today, the hegemony is a shadow of its former self in terms of military capability, Zethkai admitted. We have no expansion fleets, no conquest forces, no ability to impose our will on other species, but our citizens live longer, healthier, more fulfilling lives than any Kethari in our recorded history. But transformation hadn't been limited to the Kethari. Throughout the galaxy, aggressive species were making similar choices. often after encountering the same evolutionary pressure that had convinced the hegemony to change. The humans succeeded in something that no military force in galactic history had achieved, Zethkai said. They ended the age of empire through conquest, not by destroying aggressive species, but by making aggression itself evolutionarily disadvantageous. The final holographic display showed the current state of the galaxy. Thousands of species cooperating in ways that would have been impossible under the old system of territorial expansion and resource competition. But the most disturbing aspect of human success, Zethkai concluded, is that we still don't understand how they did it. We know they transcended physical limitations. We know they can manipulate reality through conscious intent. We know they've made aggression itself a losing strategy. But we don't know if they planned this outcome from the beginning or if they're still making decisions that will reshape the galaxy in ways we can't predict. A council member raised her arm. Commander, are you suggesting that humans are still evolving? That their capabilities are continuing to expand? Zethkai's mandibles clicked slowly, a sign of deep uncertainty. Council member Zarakan, I honestly don't know. The humans I encountered during the Sol System battle were desperate, angry, and driven by immediate survival needs. The humans that Dr. Vasquez represents seem to have transcended those limitations entirely. I can't predict what they might become next, or what new capabilities they might develop. The implications hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. Humanity had already transformed the galaxy once. If they were still evolving, still developing new abilities, there was no way to predict what changes they might implement next. The only certainty, Zethkai said as he prepared to conclude his presentation, is that humans have fundamentally altered the rules of galactic civilization. The age of expansion through conquest is over. The age of cooperation through mutual benefit has begun, and somewhere in the galaxy, in ways we can't detect or understand, humans are continuing to evolve into something that may reshape reality itself according to their principles. He looked out at the assembled officials, military leaders, and government representatives, seeing his own fears reflected in their faces. That, distinguished colleagues, is why I tell you that the day we fought humanity was the day I met true horror. Not because they were strong, not because they were dangerous, but because they were right. And being right gave them the power to change everything, whether we wanted them to or not. The lecture hall fell silent as Commander Zethkai's words sank in. 20 cycles after the destruction of Earth, the galaxy was still learning to live with the consequences of that victory. And somewhere among the stars, humanity continued its evolution into something that transcended every category of existence that other species understood. The war was over. Humanity had won by losing so completely that they had become something that couldn't be defeated. And the truly terrifying part was that no one knew what they would become next.